Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really plunging into something critical. It's all about how communities, try to balance growth, safety, and just the hard economic facts. Especially when dealing with things like floods. We've got a couple of really solid sources guiding us today. One's a big guide on floodplain management. The other's an environmental assessment for a huge infrastructure project. So our goal here is to pull out the key insights for you. And the big question we're asking is essentially, how do we build communities, build the infrastructure we need, keep them resilient, and do it responsibly, fiscally responsibly, while also, keeping that local character intact?
It's a massive challenge, and floods aren't just occasional problems. They are, unfortunately, the most common natural disaster we face in the U.S. If you look back just between, 1953 and 1968, there were 182 separate disaster declarations just for floods.
Wow.
Yeah. And for many of you listening, especially in places like Texas, this isn't abstract. Think Hurricane Harvey or those Dallas-Fort Worth flash floods in 2022. These events just keep happening, highlighting these complex, persistent issues.
That really sets the stage. So with flooding being so widespread, it feels like something the whole country needs to address. How did the government first step in?
Well, the big move was the National Flood Insurance Act back in 1968. It happened largely because, private insurers just weren't offering flood coverage. It's a classic market failure, really. But what's really striking about this program, the NFIP, is its financial path. It's racked up enormous debt. Went from over $17 billion in debt in 2011 to, get this, $24 billion by early 2014.
$24 billion. That's huge.
Huge. And a lot of that was driven by massive events like Katrina, Rita, and Sandy, just hammered the program financially.
So the safety net itself became this major financial headache. How were they even setting the premiums? Did that change?
That's a really key point. The way they priced the risk, the methodology, it's evolved. Or, it tried to. There was the Biggert-Waters Act in 2012. That act aimed to make premiums reflect the actual risk, the actuarial risk, moving away from old discounts, getting rid of grandfathering where people kept low rates even if the risk changed.
Okay, that sounds logical. Make people pay for their actual risk exposure.
Exactly. But then politics came into play. The Homeowner Flood Insurance Affordability Act of 2013 basically hit the brakes. It delayed those rate increases and actually brought back the grandfathering.
So wait, if some people weren't paying the true cost, who picked up the tab? The money has to come from somewhere, right?
Precisely. That cost didn't just vanish. It got spread out across all the other policyholders. And, ultimately it still contributes to the program's debt, which taxpayers are on the hook for. It really throws up that fundamental question. How do you balance helping individual homeowners afford insurance versus making sure the system reflects real risk and protects the broader community, including taxpayers? It's that tension, short-term affordability versus long-term fiscal health and accurate risk pricing.
Right. So if I'm a homeowner or maybe a developer trying to figure all this out today, how do these federal changes actually affect me on the ground? What am I dealing with now?
Well, FEMA's latest big update is called Risk Rating 2.0 Equity in Action. The idea is to communicate flood risk much more clearly. It uses better technology, more data points, things like specific property details, how much rain falls, what it actually costs to rebuild your specific house, not just relying on those broad flood zones.
So more personalized risk assessment.
Essentially, yes. Aiming for premiums that are more equitable, that really match up with an individual property's unique flood risk and value. Trying to move beyond just the old flood maps.
Okay. And what about state and local governments? Are they just enforcing federal rules, or do they have their own role?
Oh, they play a crucial role. It's definitely not just about federal mandates. State agencies like the Texas Water Development Board, for example, are really active on the ground. They do everything from helping towns write their flood rules, providing technical help, disaster aid. They work closely with FEMA and local communities on mapping, insurance, and importantly, mitigation efforts, like the community rating system, the CRS. That's a great example. Communities that do more than the minimum federal standard for floodplain management can get discounts on flood insurance for their residents.
So it's an incentive for local action. Go above and beyond, save your residents money.
Exactly. It encourages that proactive, responsible local planning.
That makes a lot of sense, tailoring it locally. Okay, so we have the federal policies, the state support. Now let's get really practical. If you're living in or thinking about developing in a flood-prone area, what are the actual rules? What can and can't you do?
Right. This is where it gets down to the nitty-gritty regulations. And they aren't just suggestions. If you're building something new or doing what's called a substantial improvement in a special flood hazard area, that's an SFHA, the 1% annual chance flood zone. There are very clear rules, for instance, for new buildings in certain zones, like A130 or AE zones on the FEMA maps, the lowest floor, and that includes the basement, generally has to be elevated up to or even above the base flood elevation, the BFE.
Okay, elevate the living space. What about just raising the ground itself with fill? People do that all the time, right? Build up the land first.
They do, but it's heavily regulated. Using fill in an SFAK counts as development, so you need a permit.
Right.
And it's not just any dirt. It has to be good, clean soil. It needs to be compacted by machine to 95% of its maximum density. That means it's really packed down tight, very stable.
95%. Wow.
Yeah, it's serious engineering. And the fill pad has to extend out 10 to 15 feet beyond the building itself. Plus, the slopes on the side can't be too steep, no more than 2.1, and they have to be protected so they don't erode.
So these aren't just suggestions. They're like hard-won lessons baked into code.
Absolutely. Decades of experience showing what works and what leads to disaster later on. Even small details done wrong can cost a fortune down the line. It's about building in resilience from the start.
Okay, that level of detail is pretty amazing. It's not just don't build. It's if you build, here are the engineering minimums. Now, what about that term substantial improvement? Does that only apply to brand new houses?
No, not at all. Substantial improvement covers any major work on an existing building. Reconstruction, rehab, adding on. If the cost of that work hits 50% or more of the building's market value before you started, that triggers it.
So if you're doing a major renovation.
Exactly. The idea is that if you're investing that much, you should also bring the structure up to current safety standards, make it more flood resistant. Don't just rebuild the old risks back in. Although, interestingly, there can be exemptions sometimes for designated historic structures. The goal there is to balance preservation with safety, but risk reduction is still the priority.
Right. So we've talked about individual properties. What about bigger picture things communities do? Mitigation seems key.
Totally key. Beyond individual building codes, communities are definitely pursuing larger projects, often with federal help. Some strategies are costly but effective, like voluntary buyouts, purchasing and tearing down homes that flood repeatedly.
And what happens to that land?
Often it's dedicated as open space, maybe for parks, or sometimes crucially, for restoring wetlands or natural habitats that can actually help absorb floodwaters, turning a problem area into a community asset. Other things communities do: physically elevating existing houses onto higher foundations, or even moving entire homes to safer ground. There's a whole toolbox of strategies to reduce overall risk and build resilience, which, saves money and heartache in the long run.
Okay, let's try to tie all these threads together with a real-world example. This proposed US 54 East Kellogg Highway expansion near Wichita and Andover in Kansas. This sounds like it touches on everything. It's not just a road project, right? It's driven by massive growth. Andover grew, 76% in just 10 years?
Yeah, huge growth, and the existing road just can't handle it. You've got intersections already at level of service, E or F, during rush hour.
Which basically means gridlocked, right?
Yeah.
Total chaos.
Pretty much stop and go, massive delays. And they project that by 2042, the backups, the queues, could be over 1,600 feet long. That's a third of a mile in stop traffic.
Yikes. Okay, so they need to expand. What were the options?
Well, it's a big project, expanding to a 6-lane freeway over about 4.25 miles. For one key phase 2, there was a major choice: build the main highway lanes elevated, up on structures, or depressed, basically in a trench below ground level. And the city of Andover had a strong preference. They really pushed for the depressed option.
Why depressed? Seems like it might be more complicated.
Their reasoning, which came out of a study they did back in 2011, was about community character. They wanted to preserve their small-town feel and avoid having an elevated freeway create this big visual barrier like a wall cutting through the city.
Okay, I can understand that desire. But what about the cost? Here's where the fiscal reality must bite, right?
No, absolutely. That preference for the depressed section comes with a very real, very significant price tag. The issue is the water table there. It's pretty high, only 6 to 18 feet below the surface.
Uh-oh. Water and a big trench don't mix well.
Exactly. To keep that depressed roadway stable, to protect the pavement and the ground underneath, they'd need a permanent dewatering system. Essentially, pumps running constantly.
And the cost for that?
The estimates are $5 million to $10 million just to install it. Then you're looking at about $100,000 every year for maintenance and operation. Plus, the pumps themselves need replacing every 3 or 4 years at a cost of around $1 million each time.
Wow. So millions up front and then hundreds of thousands, potentially millions more every few years forever.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Whereas the elevated option, it would completely avoid all those ongoing dewatering costs. So you have this direct clash. the community's aesthetic preference versus a very substantial recurring financial burden.
That really crystallizes the dilemma. How do you weigh that small town feel against potentially millions in ongoing costs that taxpayers will have to cover?
It forces a really tough conversation about community values versus long-term fiscal sustainability and engineering practicality. Is that aesthetic preference worth that continuous investment? And it's not just the cost. The project brings other impacts too, like converting over 44 acres of prime farmland.
Right, taking farmland out of production.
And acquiring land 116 different parcels needed, which means displacing people and businesses. 11 homes and 20 businesses have to move.
That's disruptive. How is that handled?
There are processes like the Uniform Relocation Act that provide compensation and assistance, but it's still a major impact. Plus, you have the environmental side managing the impacts on about 35 acres of floodplain, dealing with wetlands, streams, all requiring permits and mitigation. And practical stuff too, like finding and removing old underground gas station tanks along the route. It's complex.
So we really see it all here. Federal flood insurance policy and its debt, the detailed engineering rules for building safely, and then these intense local debates about infrastructure choices, community character, and who pays. Andover's choice for the depressed highway, knowing the costs. That's a powerful example.
It really is. And it underlines that successful community development, building resilient places, almost always involves making these difficult compromises. It requires really understanding the facts, the environmental costs, the social impacts, the long-term economic burden, and then deciding, as a community, what trade-offs you're willing to accept to get the outcome you want, while, of course, following the rules and using resources wisely.
As communities keep growing, keep facing these environmental realities like flooding, you really have to ask, are the decisions we're making today setting us up for success? Are they just solving today's problem, or are they fiscally sound, genuinely resilient, and reflecting a responsible plan for the decades ahead?